I don't think I can hear you anymore. Can you still hear him,
No,
Fayge?
I can't.
Okay, we lost you, Anthony. I thought maybe it was just,
Oh,
oh, no, he's gone completely. Oh, no, we lost him. He didn't like the question, I guess.
he was like, no.
Welcome to Conversely, the show that's like a time machine for your ears, where you will be listening in our future to a conversation that was recorded in your past by the people who are present right now. And by present, I mean virtually present, because we're actually all in different places. But anyway, I'm excited to introduce you to my guest for today. First up, Fayge Horesh, who is a public historian, a tour guide, a writer, and a podcaster. Why don't you tell us about your podcast?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My podcast is D-Listers of History. We talk about interesting people you probably didn't learn about in school. We bring in experts or just history enthusiasts. And we just kind of explore the history space in spaces that usually aren't covered in typical history educational things.
So, like, who's the most recent person you've talked about that people wouldn't know?
Our most recent episode was Daniel of Beccles, who was actually, we don't know who he was. That's part of the thing with Daniel of Beccles. But he is attributed with writing the first courtesy text in England. It was written in Latin, but it was written in England. And I interviewed Daniel Cybulski, I think is how you say her last name. She just wrote a book about medieval manners. And so we talked about Daniel of Beccles.
Cool. I've never heard of Daniel of Beccles, so yeah, you were
Neither had I
correct.
before
It's
I
a
started
person I've never heard of.
researching
Yep. And then next up we have Anthony Lavopa. Anthony is an active duty U.S. naval officer and leadership coach with over 15 years of military service, including command of a U.S. Navy warship. So that sounds very impressive.
Thanks. It was a blast. Honestly, commanding a ship is an incredible honor, and it's an incredible amount of trust given to captains. But the crew that I had was phenomenal, and it was the best experience professionally that I've ever had.
Very cool. Yeah. And so what is a leadership coach? What does that mean?
I think it's different things to different people. What I really try and do is understand the roadblocks and challenges that people have, and give them a nudge in the direction that they're trying to go. Oftentimes they just don't know the questions to ask, or they haven't realized they already know the answer. And so my job is to kind of help tease the answer out of them, not give them direction to go. But oftentimes it's simple things like, hey, where are you now? Okay, what are your goals? Got it. To get from where you are to your goals, what are some things you think you need to do? And some people just don't think that way, or they don't think that they have the capacity to think that way. So my job is to help them realize that they're much smarter and much more capable than they give themselves credit for.
Cool. Well, one thing that I thought we might start with to get to know each other a little better is a couple of would you rather questions. I'm sure you guys have done would you rather questions before. So my first one is, would you rather relive 24 hours from any day in the past or glimpse 30 seconds of any day in the future?
I think I would vote for the past. I have some really fond memories of spending time with my grandparents, who I was really close with, and so being able to go back and spend a day with my grandfather, who's like one of my favorite people ever, would be awesome.
Well, I would take the opposite, I think. I'm a sci-fi fan, so when I hear like relive 24 hours in the past, I'm like, butterfly effect. I don't know. I think I can change a thing, but maybe it would go wrong and unintended consequences. But yeah, so I guess I would do the future one. I'm not sure what I would do with that information, but I guess it depends on what I saw.
Well, I'm surprised that you would choose to go to the future because, being a historian, I figured maybe you would like to go back to the past and experience one of these, events in history or something.
Yeah, but I guess as a historian, I know how just such singular decisions have these massive, like, resulting potential
Yeah.
changes and so forth. And it just honestly just gives me anxiety, the idea that I might mess something up.
Sure.
But yeah, it would be really cool to just see what like my city, Philadelphia, was like, 100, 200, 300 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. So as long as it was safe and you couldn't mess things up, then
Sure.
maybe past would be interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if it was like just watching, if I was like a non-participant.
Yeah. Cool. Neat. And I also feel like, going forward would be interesting just because, we know a lot about the past. We don't know everything about the past, obviously, right? We think we know everything sometimes, but we don't. But we know a lot about the past, so you kind of have some idea of what that was like. I have no idea what the future is going to be like, right? So it would be kind of interesting, although 30 seconds is not very long. You'd get there, you'd be there just long enough to have lots of questions probably and not actually learn anything. So, although, you could go to the future and see some of your descendants or something, which would be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So the next Would You Rather, this one is, so we're assuming we are in the past for this one. Would you rather have escaped the Black Plague in the 1300s or have survived the eruption of Pompeii?
Okay, I know my answer.
Neither one would be a lot of fun.
Well, I am Italian, so I would go with Pompeii.
Okay.
What I really want is like pre-eruption Pompeii, because like it was so cool. They had like takeout food. It was amazing.
Well, and if you have survived the eruption of Pompeii, that implies that you were in Pompeii at least for a little bit before it happened, right? Yeah. You're not necessarily time traveling to then. Maybe it's you had lived then or something. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. My inclination was after the Black Plague, just because there was a time of huge economic upswing because so much of the population had died. But it also wasn't a super great time to be Jewish in Europe. So, it's a balance.
Yeah, that's true. Well, neither one would be a fun thing to go through, obviously. But, it's assumed that you're surviving. You're escaping the plague, surviving the eruption. So, all right, cool. Well, so you may have noticed a little bit of a theme with our Would You Rathers. There's some time travel stuff going on, and my question, my hypothetical, is related to that. So before we get to the actual question, I've seen a lot of headlines in the past few years. There was a TikTok thing last year with this time traveler supposedly from the year 2000, 2671, and he had 6 bizarre predictions for 2023, and then there was another headline, time travelers from 2027 share footage claiming there's no sign of human life. So we've got these people in our present day who claim to be time travelers from the future coming back, right? So my question is, if you traveled back in time, somehow you've got some time machine and it sends you back in time to the past, and you arrive with no clothing, no other items from today, but you just we'll say you happen to show up right next to some laundry hanging on a wash or something. So you've got clothes, but they're of the day. How would you prove that you were from the future? We have these people that claim to be from the future, and we don't believe them, of course. If you had gone back in time, you're back to 1700, 1600, 1500, whatever. How are you going to prove that you're from the future?
I mean, the big thing, I said I'm a sci-fi fan, so I've actually thought about this way too much. The big thing is saying something that is going to happen soon that is not extraordinary.
Yeah, so predicting the future, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, so like if I go to like 1750 and I'm like, I had a thing that sat in my pocket that had all of human knowledge in it, that's just like, you're just nuts. But if I happen to be lucky enough to be in a time and a place where I can be like, oh, well, there's going to be this political event.
Right. If you're in 1776 and you can talk about the start of the Revolutionary War or something like that, yeah. Or the Declaration of Independence or something, yeah.
Right.
And John Hancock's going to sign his name real big at the bottom, something like that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Something specific like that that's not, yeah. And I suppose it depends somewhat on how far back you go. Because I think the predicting something in the future thing, lots of people were doing that anyways. And I wonder if people would just think you were some sort of, witch or something, like, oh, they're magic instead of,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where the specificity is important, because when you talk to people who are like fortune tellers and stuff, it's usually like there will be good fortune in your future.
Right.
So it's very
real vague.
like general. So I think that the specificity is really important.
But even if you have something specific and it comes true, are they gonna believe that you time traveled, or are they gonna just think you are some sort of, you've made some deal with the devil or whatever? I mean,
I think it depends on the era. So like 1776, I think that it could go either way depending on where you are. In Philadelphia, I think there was enough like interest in science and so forth that they wouldn't just jump to like devils and stuff. But it depends on who I meet, I guess.
sure, yeah, definitely makes a difference.
Not necessarily going to run into Ben Franklin, might get that weird guy who lives on Water Street who's going to get yellow fever in a couple of years.
Right, yeah. And I guess that also depends on if you happen to be close in time to an event that specifically about, right?
Yeah.
Because even there's a lot of events that we might know the year that it happened, but not exactly when or...
Well, and also, like, not everybody knows everything that's happening, even in their city. And this is a a pet peeve of mine, is people will sometimes be like, "Oh, you're a history person. Tell me the name of George Washington's third favorite horse." And I'm like, I don't know, man.
You know everything about history, right?
Like, you have Google. I'm gonna Google it. So, so if it is sometime that I have not really researched, I'd be lost.
Yeah, because you might be like, oh, it's 1720, so sometime in the next 15 years, this thing happens, but I can't remember exactly when. Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh no, I skipped that day of American history.
So, Anthony, with your military background, I assume you've been thrust into some situations where you had to think on your feet and come up with a solution quickly. This seems like sort of like that, a little different, but you're thrust into into history. How are you proving you're from the future?
Yeah, I've certainly probably had handfuls and handfuls of situations where I've had to think on my feet in the last 15 years. Yeah, I think I would agree with her answer. I think being able to speak intelligently about something that's relevant in the near term and provide some level of clarity for the general population. I think it's also important to keep in context that the further back you go, the less access to information people had. Certainly, the less people could read and write, and so you'd have to be able to explain something that was very basic to them in very basic terms. And something that was relevant to them. If you're happen to be in colonial America and you're talking about something that's going to occur in Japan, you might as well be talking about something in outer space, right?
Right, because they're not going to know about it anyways to verify your
That's right. But to your point, if it was 1770 and you said, hey, in the next 5 years, America is going to declare war on Great Britain and it's going to be over her independence, or, a few dozen folks are going to be shot in Lexington and Concord, on or about this day. I think that would be something really relevant. It would probably give you some good street credibility.
Yeah. So then the big issue becomes being close enough in time to something that the date of, right? Like if you don't show up right at the start of the Revolutionary War or some major thing like that, are you even gonna know what to predict? Yeah.
Or something oddly specific. So like Revolutionary War would be perfect for me because like I'm a tour guide in Philly. This is like whether we like it or not, this is what we do. So like being able to say like, oh, the first Continental Congress is going to meet in Carpenter's Hall would work, but like because I don't do dates.
So assuming there's not something happening soon that you know the date of, let's say you show up in, I don't know, 1683, right? Some random time. Like, what's another, what else can you do?
I think you could probably try and connect the dots for people on a series of events. So you could say something that you personally witnessed, right? I don't know, pick whatever thing you want, but it would have to be 3 or 4, I think at a minimum, kind of sequential events to say, I was present for this, or I remember this, or these things happened. Again, like very large, big picture things. The world will go to war in 1914. It'll happen again in 1940. In roughly 1900, people will create this machine that allows us to fly. So, something along those lines where you can kind of walk that, thing, or think of an everyday thing that people use and how we know it today. So, we went from horses and carriages to, sailing ships to steamships to steam locomotives to, gas turbine ships, or, I think you just kind of have to make it super relatable.
But are they going to believe you? Are they going to just think you're crazy? Oh, yeah, sure. We're going to be in flying machines. Right.
I mean, I think it's always important to remember people in the past aren't stupid. They just are working with less information than we have.
Sure.
So I think assuming you have enough information to be able to connect those dots, like Anthony was saying, like, I think it'd be possible. I keep thinking about how language would potentially be a challenge.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
People just talk different.
Even going back 50 years, it's not as dramatic, but there's definitely differences, right?
Oh my gosh, you don't even need 15 years. I was talking to some young person from Germany, and I used some slang that I picked up in Germany in 2002, and they had no idea what I was saying.
Yeah,
don't have to go back
my
that
kids
far.
sometimes say things, and my wife and I are like, "What does that mean?"
What?
Yeah. So yeah, for sure. If you go back a couple hundred years, the language is going to be an issue.
And like just how you behave yourself. I actually, the thing that got me interested in history, there was a computer game that I had when I was a small child, called Pepper's Adventures in Time.
Okay.
And it was, I think they were going to try to make a whole series of these where Pepper goes to different time frames, but I was probably the only one who got this computer game because I'm a huge nerd. I've always been a huge nerd. But she goes back in time to colonial Philadelphia. And it's exactly your sort of scenario where she like lands next to like a clothesline so she can get like modern clothes, and
that way you can avoid the problem of, well, she's walking around naked, what do you do with her? Yeah.
Right. Well, she had her clothes. Yeah. So if you like
she had her clothes. Okay.
Yeah. So if you have her walk out of the alleyway before she changes, people are like, oh no, it's a girl in pants. She has to like dress up as a boy because she wouldn't have any access without that. But she gets in all kinds of trouble just because she's like, she's a little bit of a troublemaker, Pepper, but she'll talk back to these like British soldiers and stuff and things that like would not fly in 1776 that you could get away with in, I don't know when this was, like 1995, something like that.
Sure, yeah. And I'm not sure why you would need to prove you're from the future necessarily, right? I mean, if you just found yourself in the past, maybe you would just pretend like you were from there and try to fit in. But as you said, people would certainly know that you were a foreigner or something because of your accent, the way you talk, the way you act. I wonder if there's some sort of science-y things that you could, some sort of technological advancement that you could use to prove, like, if you go back far enough, you could try to say, well, you guys don't know about germs yet, but germs are a thing, and try to get someone with a microscope to prove that's a thing, and maybe that could help prove that you're from the future. I don't know. Or maybe they would just think, oh, this is a really smart person that knows stuff that we haven't learned yet. I don't know.
I think it's tough because I think even if you were in the present but back in the future, and you think of some major theories that people came up with, like the Earth isn't flat, the Earth revolves around the sun, Einstein's theory of relativity, right? Even in the present day, with the amount of educated people that there were plenty of people that were willing to dispute those things. And it wasn't until, repeated, ships went over the horizon and they didn't fall into the abyss did people eventually say, okay, well, maybe the world isn't flat. We're not going
I
to
mean,
fall
some
off the
people
edge.
still won't admit that, but
Well,
Sure. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's a very, very small group, but there are still people who just, yeah. So yeah, I do wonder how would that be evidence that you're from the future? Would they just not believe you? Would they not? That's why I thought of germs, something you could see in a microscope, something that you could potentially prove to sciencey people at least.
I mean,
right?
I don't know if you could prove germs existed before
I don't know
germ
if you
theory
can.
existed.
I don't
Because
know.
germ theory
Yeah.
was, when that first came out, people were like, what? There are little things we can't see?
Right, right.
Like, in fact, what are you talking about? Don't you know disease comes from bad air?
Right.
My question is there something that I understand well enough to be able to demonstrate and explain?
Right.
Like if I lived in a time pre lightning rods or whatever, I could probably pull that off. But if
But again, like the germs thing, I kind of know how, but do I know it well enough to explain it to people who have no concept of that? I don't know if I do. Yeah.
yeah, like I sort of like, speaking of ships, sort of vaguely understand buoyancy, but like if somebody asked me to explain it, I'd be like, oh no. Like
Right,
they used to
right.
put rocks in the bottom of ships. Why? For buoyancy. Why did that do that? I have no idea.
Right.
Stop asking questions.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's probably more Anthony's area of
Yeah.
expertise.
The other thing that comes to mind is, what math or science could you use to prove something? And depending on where you were, could you use the basic, Newton's laws of physics on a writing tab or a chalkboard with someone, and write an equation out and then show them why the equation is true, right? Or find enough people that understood the, mathematics language. You could get everybody in a room and say, hey, I know you don't know this yet, but F equals ma, right? And let me explain to you what F equals ma is, and then break it down for them. And then maybe you could, get enough consensus of people in the room to go, oh, well, that's possible, right? I mean, I don't know. I think it's challenging.
And then that goes back to I know F equals ma. I actually have an engineering degree, so I learned quite a bit about forces and things. But do I understand it well enough to go back in time several hundred years and use it to explain? I don't know. That's
That's why I picked the
tough.
F equals ma, because I'm an engineer too. But if I had to go back and talk to somebody about multivariable calculus or thermodynamics or something, no, sorry, you get the wrong guy from the future.
Yeah. I could, maybe get by on a test to kind of fake my way through it, but to know it well enough to explain it to somebody else, especially from the past that doesn't have that, they're like, as Fayge said, they're smart people back in the past. They were not dumber than us, but they didn't have the knowledge that we have, right? All the years and decades of centuries of this building, and so they're kind of starting from scratch, and that's tough. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it would have to be something that they've already done some work around, because I'm just imagining like if you went to the Black Death Europe and started talking about germ theory, like there's no way. Like there's nothing you could do that would convince anybody of that. But if you are trying to, I don't know, explain how forces work and you're in 15 something something or whatever, there's people doing that work. So you might be able to find someone who knows what you're talking about.
Sure. Yeah.
There's always people who are just like ridiculous, though. One of the people we covered on the podcast was Augustin Fresnel, who invented the Fresnel lens that was used in it's used in a lot of things, but it's in this case we were talking about lighthouses. And there were these guys in the Science Academy in France who just would not accept that light was in waves. These were like some of the smartest people in the world at the time, and they were like, nope, light is particles. I don't care what you show me. Light's particles.
Light being a wave or a particle is kind of an interesting thing, because it's kind of both depending on how you want to test it.
Yeah. When I did the research, there was a huge amount of research where I read a whole thing, and I'm like, I have no idea what I just read. Physics is not my.
It's kind of a particle and a wave, which is really, light is kind of a weird thing like that. It's sort of its own, I don't know. It doesn't fit with anything else. I think the correct answer is we don't know what it is, really. That's one of those things that someone from the future could maybe explain to us to prove that they're from the future, right?
Indeed. I just know a Fresnel lens works because he did the math.
Yes.
That's all I got.
So do you think it gets easier or harder the farther back in time you go?
Oh, harder.
Harder?
Yeah, again, I think it's the struggle to relate, right? Relate things that we know now to, if you went back to 1900, there's enough commonality between now and the last 100 years where you could, hey, I know Ford just came out with the Model T, but in the not so distant future, you can drive a car at 200 miles an hour. That might make people's head explode a little bit, but that's very different than going back to 1100, in Western Europe and saying, I don't know, pick your topic. People are like, wow, that's so far out of my, get up, do my farming, go to church, come home. Like, that's so far out of my thing. I lost you.
I mean, and even those commonalities, like you said, go to church, like what Catholicism, assuming, because it's Europe, so what Catholicism looked like in 11 whatever is wildly different from what it looks like now. So like, even if you're like really get that stuff, like just how we conceptualized how matter worked was wildly different. Like transubstantiation, like there's so much like philosophy around that has changed in the last 1,000 years. There's just so much.
And even your F equals MA example, if you go back far enough, pre-algebra, they don't even they're not even going to understand what that means as an equation and variables and stuff, right? Because they just didn't think of math the same way.
And like, I don't even remember what year it is that zero was, the concept of zero is relatively recent.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that's mind-blowing to me that people didn't have, like, that's like almost like saying, well, it used to be that people didn't know that water existed. Like, what? Yeah. Like, how do it's just like a thing. How do you not have a zero? I don't know how, I'm not sure how you do stuff without a concept of zero. You know what I mean? Like, it's just
they weren't doing a lot in Western Europe at that time. So
sure.
It was like the Middle East. They were like, I think it was in Iraq. Well, what's now Iraq? They were like, have some algebra. And Western Europe was like, we just lost an absolutely stunning amount of our population to a plague.
Right. Yeah.
And we're blaming it on all various strange things.
Yeah. I think what would be more interesting to me if I was able to go back in time would be to see and understand how they did things in that day. Things that we now, through the lens of history, look back, since we're talking about Catholicism, I'll say, if you were in Rome at the time when the Vatican was being built, right? No calculators, no computers, no modern construction equipment, to be able to just stand there and go, wait a minute, we're doing this whole thing by hand? Like, for us as modern day, perhaps somewhat more educated folks, that would be a super interesting thing to go back and see, right? How are you actually doing this without the modern things that we had.
Yeah, not even be able to, trigonometry and calculating your angles and all that stuff that we're used to doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it brings up the question of like, what is educated? Like, if you told me to go build a house, I mean, today I might know where to look to get information on how to do that.
Yeah.
But if you put me in when the Vatican is being built, no idea, none. I'd be completely useless.
Yeah. I also think it brings up the question of what type of education is valued at what points in human history, right? And I think there's been some, sinusoidal ups and downs of that. And I think, certainly the Industrial Revolution period, we saw that if you were, considered to be educated, you had a trade. You could do something with your hands, right? You were a machinist or something like that. If you look back at the Renaissance period and Da Vinci and those folks, we would say, oh, well, they're educated because they understand math and science. And I think now it's kind of interesting that we find ourselves in the sort of questioning of what does educated really mean? Is it mean you have a 4-year degree from a university, or if you are an electrician who graduates from a trade school and then goes on to become a master electrician? I don't know. That's a pretty good education for me. I mean, you think of some of those basic things, right? Electricians, plumbers, even people that are car mechanics.
Well, especially these days, my goodness.
Yeah, you don't see many people changing their own oil in their driveway anymore, right? It's like, oh, I gotta take my car to Honda because I don't understand this, or I don't have the computer to plug into this thing, or something like that. So, yeah, I think education is also based on, what we consider to be educated is also based on perspective and perhaps some bias.
I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, even if you understand theoretically how something works, it doesn't mean you know how to do it. Like, I understand how a car works. I understand how internal combustion works. But I still bring my car in. Especially now that I have a Fiat. I thought I was going to change my own filters, and then I looked up how to do it and said, no. That involves tools. I'm not doing that. I don't have a driveway. Like,
Yeah, I think some people think of educated as like knowing lots of things, right? Oh, they know lots of facts. They're educated, but I know some people who are good at memorizing things, and they've got all these lists of things that they could just spout off the years, the dates from the history. Oh, well, this was in 1523, and then in 1525, this, but they don't necessarily understand the why or the concepts, or how to apply that list of knowledge to other things. And so, are they more educated, less educated? I don't know. Yeah.
I think a lot of it's relational too. I would say, again, I have a, bachelor's of science in engineering. I did all these crazy math classes, but I'm certainly not qualified to talk about, multivariable calculus and other high levels of math. And I don't use it on a daily basis. So maybe there's an argument of, was it really value added? And I think back to my grandfather, my mom's dad, who grew up in Sicily in the early 1900s, 1920s, was one of 6 boys. 5 out of 6 boys went to school and got a PhD or doctor, MD or the equivalent, which was rare in those times. And then the youngest one of the boys stayed home, and he was the one that inherited the farm and the olive oil making business and all those things, but was considered uneducated. Yet when we look at processes like farming, making olive oil, wine, etc., those are very intricate processes. It's not something you can just get on the Google machine and say, how do I do farming? And there's this magic recipe that pops up, or how do I make, good olive oil or good wine? It's not something you can just learn overnight from a book. And so again, I that's why I think education is very much perspective driven. For that small town in Sicily, the youngest boy who could, grow wheat, make olive oil, make wine, grow food, raise cattle, that was more important than, the PhD level education that some of his brothers had, for very small, niche things in life.
Yeah, and like also there's even just being able to, you say like you can't learn some of these things just from reading a book overnight. Sometimes the context you need is so important. Especially this comes up a lot with historic recipes. This isn't something I know a ton about, but it just sort of floats across my my desk, so to speak, periodically. Where if you look at a recipe from 100 years ago, they assume that you know things that we don't necessarily know. Like I saw a food historian was talking about making a certain kind of pie that was designed to be able to be like taken with somebody when they, went to work during the day or whatever, go out in the fields. And in the recipe, it said, you put all this stuff together and put it in a coffin. And if I read that, I'd be like, what does that mean? Like, I can take some educated guesses given that we're making a pie, but it turns out a coffin is a very specific type of pie crust that doesn't like fall apart. So you can like hold it together.
So not crumbly. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, I'm sure y'all as engineers are aware of the whole Roman cement thing where we couldn't figure out how to make Roman cement. And it turned out that when they said water, they meant seawater. Mm-hmm. And they didn't bother to write down seawater because
that was the only kind of water they had, probably.
Or just like
they
when
just
you
knew
wrote
to use
water
it,
in
yeah.
that context, they knew that's what you meant.
Well, and I've seen recipes before where it'll say something like make a roux to start off.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people don't know what a roux is, right?
Yep.
But it's sort of assumed that you know how to do that.
I tried to make a quiche once and it came out watery every time. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And it turned out the recipe, it's when it said milk, it meant whole milk.
Yeah, yeah.
And it being, 2008, I had 2% milk like everybody else. But it doesn't work with 2%. You eat all that fat.
Yeah, so yeah, there's definitely cultural kind of assumptions that you need to know based on when and where you are, and where as well, right? So not just different time periods, but different parts of the world would assume different things like that. Like the Romans, maybe it's assumed that it's seawater, but in other places they might not assume that. So
I'd be so lost if I ended up in Rome. I'd have no idea what's going on.
I'd be lost most places, if we're being honest. And most time periods, too, probably. But I feel like the farther back you go, the harder it would be to even explain to them the concept of time travel, right? Like, let alone convince them you're a time traveler. Are they even going to understand what time travel is, like, as a concept? I wonder, I don't know, at what point is that even a concept that people are aware of?
I mean, do we know what time travel is?
Well, that's a good point. we have some vague idea of, you're going to a different period in time, right? But yeah, what does that mean? What does that, in what way, and how can that affect, like you were talking about going to the past and messing up the future, and, if we go 1,000 years from now and talk about time travel, people probably are like, well, that's a stupid question to ask. Well, okay. Who knows, right? But yeah, I feel it's probably not too far back before they don't even have a concept of time travel.
Yeah, or perhaps even a concept of time, right? I mean, it
That's
wasn't.
That's a good point.
It's only been in the last few hundred years that, for example, the way that we figured out latitude and longitude was through the hourglass, right? Understanding that there were 60 minutes in 1 hour, and what's that based on, and why, and how does that affect the movement of ships across the world to help you navigate. And so if you go back far enough and you tell someone, I'm from 300 years from now, people are going to go, I don't know what that means. I know the sun comes up
right.
in the morning and it goes down at night. That's my concept of time, right? There's no clocks.
You could maybe do it to say years another way, like 300 harvests from now or something.
Sure.
That's an annual thing that maybe.
That's
I don't
right.
know. Some other way to do that, yeah.
Yeah, or even, we run into this. This is like kind of industrial revolution era thing that we're living through of like electric lighting and how that's changed our concept of how time works. So time is now this very mathematical thing. But I think about this as a relatively practicing Jewish person of like, when does the Shabbos start? When the sun goes down. When
So
does the
it
Shabbos
depends on
end?
the time
when
of year
there's
then.
right, there's when does Shabbos end? When there's 3 stars in the sky. And people have sat down and figured out when exactly the time is that those things happen in various places in the world. But in theory, I should be walking out and looking up at the sky and seeing when I can see 3 stars. I absolutely do not do
Instead,
that.
now you look at your phone and Google what time
Yep.
is Shabbos end on
I have
such
an
and
app.
such day. Yep,
I have an
yep,
app.
yep.
It's called Zazim, and it tells me when to light candles.
Yep. That makes sense. That's just, Easter is a different time every year, and it's kind of based on sort of the lunar calendar, but it's a little
Yeah.
different. And the only way that I know when it is by Googling when is Easter next year. I look it up. That's how I know.
Well, and different calendars have different ways of dealing with like
Right.
leap years and stuff. And so,
Yeah.
like in the calendar we use in Judaism, we adjust for leap years once every, I think it's like 7 years or 11 years or
Yeah,
something.
you like
is when
add
we
a whole
adjust.
month or something almost,
Yeah.
don't you?
Yeah, we do a month over.
Yeah.
And so it gets really far off. I mean, I remember when I was in a high school or college, we had Hanukkah the same weekend as Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Because the year was about to reset.
Yeah, and again, back with Easter and stuff, we have this year, Ash Wednesday, which is the start of Lent leading up to Easter, is Valentine's Day, which is really early.
Oh, that's
It's usually
lovely.
not that early, so yeah. Ash Wednesday is Valentine's Day, so.
That's a combo.
Yeah. Different calendars. Yeah, I think there would be ways to... I mean, no matter how far back you go, they have some concept of, obviously, days, right? The sun comes up and goes down. And I think they probably had some concept of years, too, because you have the harvest. If nothing else, there's always the harvest, right? They've always got to have some way to... They have some sort of yearly... And maybe they have harvest twice a year, so maybe then it's... it kind of depends on where you are and how...
Right, like do you have seasons?
What they're growing, but you still probably have seasons most places, right? Yeah, if you're at the equator, how do you...
No idea.
And you go back far enough, they might not even have a concept of years because they don't have seasons.
Yeah, I have
don't
no
know.
idea how that works down there.
Yeah. Just hope that you don't end up there, right? When you time travel.
I mean, I don't know. Like, it's warm.
Well, that's true, yeah. Although there's no air conditioning. I don't know.
Well,
No
but if you go on
ice,
an island,
no,
it's okay.
there's nothing. There's no cooling system at all, really.
Although people have had innovative ways of saying cool
Sure.
for a long time. I mean, I love in India, they've got all these like, I don't know exactly how it works. It's like there's like little cutouts in the wall that are cut out in certain ways that this causes the air to go through faster or something. I don't know. I'm the humanities person here. I don't know how any of this works.
I don't know. Yeah, cooling methods in Asia are not an area that I'm educated on.
Yeah, but math.
That's
really
true.
just
I
math
do
at the end of the
know
day.
math, probably. Yeah. Yes. All right, so let's flip it around then. Time traveler from the future claims they're from the future. We've got a few of these nowadays that we don't believe, and probably for good reason. But what would they have to do to convince you that they were a time traveler from the future? We're very skeptical people. I am, anyways. You guys probably are too. I think in general, people are now. What would convince you that someone was a time traveler from 100 years from now?
I mean, a real prediction, like a specific prediction, needs
But
to
even
come
then,
true.
would
Like,
you
very specific.
how many of those would you have to have before you actually? I mean, if they said next year, I don't know, there's going to be a volcano eruption at this place, and it happened. Would you believe they were from the future, or would you think, oh, wow, that was a lucky guess?
I think it depends on context. Like a volcano going off in a place that doesn't typically have volcanoes, I'd be pretty impressed. Like if you say a volcano went off in Iceland, that's not going to like impress me.
Right.
But if you say a volcano is going to go off in Reykjavik, that would be impressive.
Yeah. I wonder if we would actually believe them, though, or if you'd find some reason not to believe that they were from the future and time traveled. I don't know.
I think I would start out very cautiously optimistic, and then maybe after 3 or 4 events, maybe I would just move it to the optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
More likely, this person is more likely to predict something that's going to happen than they're not. But nothing's 100%, right? And I think it depends on, are you telling me who's going to win the Super Bowl, or are you telling me some other, major thing that would be, you know, totally out of left field, where you couldn't look back and say, even with a volcano, there might be enough math and science and empirical evidence to say, well, every 300 years this volcano erupts, and this was year 297, so we're kind of close to 300. I don't know. Maybe it's close enough. But I think maybe if you could give me 3 or 4 things in the not so distant future, and I could see that they're happening, or read about it or something, yeah, maybe I'd move into the optimistic category.
Mm-hmm.
Not full believer, but
There's a podcast that I listen to now and again that every year they go to see a psychic in January and they write down everything that they predicted in a spreadsheet. And then in December,
See how much of it came true.
see how much of it came true. And it's notable that in January 2020, nobody predicted COVID.
Wow.
So
that does seem notable.
yeah.
Yeah, that's like the. I just heard this again the other day. It's an old joke, but I went to see a psychic. I knocked on the door. They said, "Who is it?" And so I left. you know.
Yeah. And I mean, they would say that's not how it works. But like,
Right. Yeah.
But
no.
I mean, I think that's what it would have to be. Because also human memory is so variable. So I think it would have to be like those, like Anthony said, like 3 or 4 things and like write it down.
Yeah, I wonder how it's easy on this side to say, well, if they did this, and that, I would believe them. But on the other side of that, I do wonder if we would find some reason not to believe. It's kind of like you see somebody doing a magic trick, right? And it looks like real magic, and you have no idea how they could have done it. But you're just like, well, obviously it's a trick because it couldn't be real magic, right? And so is it, well, obviously there's some way that they got lucky with this guess because they couldn't actually be a time traveler. Somehow your brain comes up with an alternate explanation, even if you don't completely understand it. I don't know how they did it, but they must have figured something out.
Well, and this is why, like, I probably have more in common with skeptics than anyone else, but I hesitate to call myself one because so many people in the quote unquote skeptical community, it can become all possibility. Like there's so many possibilities that are completely closed off when it's really, to me, it's like those possibilities are remote. Like,
Not impossible,
I hear,
but yeah.
Yeah, like I hear a weird noise in my house. Most likely it's one of my cats. There is a possibility that it's a ghost.
It's a ghost or something, yeah.
Highly unlikely. But, whatever teeny tiny, 0.001% chance. I mean, it's still there.
Yeah. Yeah, again, back to our flat earth people that we talked about earlier, they'll do experiments sometimes and
incredible.
It comes out to prove that it's not flat. But they don't say, oh, I guess I was wrong. They always have some alternate explanation because they just can't accept.
That's my favorite part of flat earthers. I love it.
Yeah. So I feel like, eventually, Anthony, like you said, you would start to get more and more believe them a little bit more. But it would take, I feel like it would take quite a bit to convince most of us. Some people, it doesn't take anything. You can just say you're a time traveler and they believe you. But
I mean, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. So then, back to us going back into the past, it would probably take a lot more to convince them than we think it would, right? Because you'd be like, well, let me tell you about this thing that's going to happen, and then you'll all believe me. And then that would happen, and maybe a couple people would believe you, but most people would still probably not believe you that you were from the future, just because that's such a hard thing to accept, right?
yeah, I mean, I just think about, just put yourself in modern day time, right? Lately I've had, I think, 6 people in the last month and change knock on my door and want to put solar panels on my roof. right? And so they're there telling me their pitch. It's great, renewable energy, yamma yamma. They go through the whole thing, and you're kind of like, I don't know. I mean, is my electric bill really going to change that much? Is there really no upfront cost? Am I really going to get all the tax breaks? And you kind of start, just as something as simple as that. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all skeptics at heart. There's probably a few people who they knock on their door and they're like, "Wow, this is great. Yes, let's do this. Tomorrow, today. What's your first available?" But I think most of us want to read the fine print. We want to understand the detail. We want to understand the how and the why. And so I think most of us, go through that cognitive process, and we're skeptics at heart.
Yeah, our first instinct is to assume people are trying to take advantage of us, right?
Yeah,
I think a lot of times.
Yeah.
Because so many people are.
Yeah.
You've got the email scams and the politicians making promises that they're not going to follow through on, and there's just so many things in life that feel like people are scamming you that's sort of our instinct a lot of times.
Yeah, and also like one of my questions is like why am I trying to convince people I'm from the future? Like what is the situation that
Sure.
I'm in? Because I mean, I feel like if I got thrown back into the past, I'd have bigger problems. Like how do I eat? Where am I sleeping?
Yeah, you'd be better off just to try and blend in and
But also like people never think about doing laundry in the apocalypse, but like you do need to do laundry during the apocalypse. There's so much like when that green energy person comes to your door, it's like, yeah, I might be interested, but like I need to make dinner. I've got to scrub my floors, whatever it is. Like this, we all have so many things we have to do that it's easy to just put things to the side that are too much.
Cool. All right. Well, I thought this would be an interesting topic, and I thought you guys would be perfect for it. Obviously, we're not gonna be able to experience it and test it, so it's all hypothetical.
I hope not.
Yeah,
That sounds hard.
it'd be on the one hand, I think it would be amazing to be around when time travel. I say when as if it's eventually going to happen, but if time travel were invented. But at the same time, like you said, it sounds hard.
I mean, I always think of it too of like what I prefer to think about is like, what would a historical person coming to now think? And I sometimes
something going forward from the past to now. Yeah,
like how cool would it be to show like Benjamin Franklin, like this is what happened. Like you
and especially someone like Benjamin Franklin who was, again, educated, right? But also like clearly he was very smart. He had a very good scientific mind, and he would potentially be able to understand some of those things that you could show him.
Yeah, and key to laying the foundations to things that are still around. I've been sitting on this just because there hasn't been a moment, but I happen to be right across the river right now from the most highly decorated battleship in U.S. naval history.
Battleship New Jersey.
Yep. So USS New Jersey is on the Delaware River. Speaking of going back in time, it's a very cool tour. I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I've been to Philadelphia twice, just for a couple of days each time. It was sort of part of a, Washington D.C., Philadelphia, New York kind of trip. And
we're the lunch stop between New York and D.C.
Yeah, kind of. We were there for 2 or 3 days, both times that I've been there. Went to a Phillies game, so we were there long enough.
Oh, that's fun. Phillies fans are a delight.
Well, I'm a Cubs fan, but we like to go to baseball games all over the place. So
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me for this conversation. I appreciate it. You guys were great, very interesting, as I expected you to be. Fayge, why don't you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and what you do and your podcast and all the things?
Yeah. So I'm D-Listers of History, no hyphens, basically everywhere. But if you go to dlistersofhistory.com, everything's there, or will be soon. I'm currently revamping the website, but you can listen. You can there's a link to listen there and stuff. It's got the key information.
All right. And Anthony, where can people find out about you? I think you had your LinkedIn maybe is where people want to go to. Is that right?
Yeah, I use my LinkedIn for most things. I am going to get a website together at some point in the free time that I don't really have. But LinkedIn's the best place to find me. I'm always happy to chat with people, and I get a chance to meet really interesting people every day. So I'm a huge LinkedIn fan.
Yeah, and you're still active duty, is that right?
I am. Yep.
Yeah, but currently not out and about overseas and
Not
such.
not out and about. Full-time student, which is great.
Full-time student. Okay. An engineering student then, I take it?
No, I'm a
like-
student at the Naval War
Oh, okay.
College, so pursuing
Oh,
my
okay.
master's degree in national security affairs. Yeah,
Gotcha. So you already did the engineering, now you're doing
I did
other-
the engineering.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Okay,
You
thanks.
guys have a good day. I'll see you
Thanks.
later.
Too.
If something happens one time, anomaly. Happens 2 times, it's like, oh, okay, maybe. But whenever there's a trend of 18 plus, 20 plus things being predicted, you gotta go like, hey, Groening, the gig's up. We know. You're a time traveler.
Just tell us.